Great. Welcome, everybody. Very good to have you all with us today in our book club when we are discussing a really interesting book, very relevant and practical to most of you joining this call, titled When Teams Work, How to Develop and Lead a High-Performance Team. We will have with us today two of the three authors of the book. We'll have with us Nigel Melville. We'll also have with us Mike Brent. And the third co-author of the book, Fiona Dent. She will be with us in spirit, but we will have a really interesting conversation about when teams work and how to turn them into a high-performance team. My name is Ina Toegel, Professor of Leadership at IMD. I lead the program about high-performance teams at IMD. And of course, for me, this is a very special occasion, being able to talk to Mike and Nigel today about the idea of turning groups into teams and then into high-performance teams. Welcome, Nigel. Welcome, Mike. Very good to meet you. I just want to say a couple of words as I introduce you and what our readers can expect from the book, and then I'm looking forward to our dialogue. Mike, you're one of the authors of the book, and very happy to have you with us today. You're a faculty at Hult Business School. You have tremendous experience in facilitating, in researching teams, and have, of course, enormous experience in executive education yourself. So thank you very much for being with us. Nigel, having you as well is a privilege. You have captained the rugby team of England. You have executive experience as well at the highest ranks with Nike, in associations, in rugby associations around the world as well. Great privilege to have you with us today. And of course, Fiona Dent, who's not with us today, but I still want to acknowledge her as well, who has as well an enormous experience in research, but also in the practical field, professor at Hult Business School as well. And very, very happy to have both of you representing the three of you. Very warm welcome to everybody. Nigel, Mike, tell us a little bit about the origins of the book. Where did it all start? Where did the idea originate? Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, thank you for having us along. Shall I kick off, Mike?
Yeah, please.
Does that work? It's great to be here. We're really excited about the book, and we've really enjoyed the process of writing the book. I think the process started in the 1990s. I mean, it was late 1990s. I was coaching a team called Wasps in England who'd just gone professional. And the English Rugby Union had this program, which was an elite coaching program. And they got the leading coaches in the country and sent us to this place called Ashridge, which we'd no idea where it was or what it was. We were just sent to this place by a guy called Kevin Bowring, who was head of coach development. So we went to this grand place, a fantastic place, for a weekend, I think, initially. And we all got together as coaches, and we thought we were going to be talking about rugby and rugby coaching and about how we can become better at being directors of rugby, but that was far from the truth. And so that was the time when I actually met Mike for the first time, when we were then exposed to a number of programs run at Ashridge, from coaching to things working in teamwork, from psychological development, all kinds of things, our own personal development as well. And we enjoyed the experience. We went back to our clubs and started putting in place some of the things that we'd been exposed to, and some of them worked, which was great. So I got the bug about theory and practice. I'm a practitioner, and Mike's very much a theorist. And so these theories kept being thrown at us, and we'd take them back to our clubs and try them out and see which ones worked and which ones didn't. And so that's the genesis of the relationship and the book. But the book didn't come up for years later, but I'll let Mike explain his side of it.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, well, the book came about because Nigel and I met in a pub near Twickenham to have lunch. And Nigel started talking about books and how he'd be keen to write and share his experience. And could I help get involved? And I thought it was a brilliant idea, because for many years, and at the top levels of sport, in both playing and captaining and administrating the sport chief executive level, I thought that would be a great thing to share. And we discussed several subjects, and the subject that kept coming back was the subject of teamwork in general. And we had a conversation about how teams work in sport, and then how teams work in organizations. And we realized actually there was quite a gap because there was a focus on teamwork in sport. And although we talk about teams in businesses, we realized that very few businesses actually train anybody to work in a team. And my practical experience of working in exec ed, which means working with managers all over the world, that resonated because I don't see many managers who are actually, they have teams, they lead teams, they work in teams, but they've never had any training, any development, or any kind of conscious development about what that actually means.
Thank you so much for this insight, because indeed, my experience as well is that oftentimes we overestimate leadership, or we talk a lot about leadership and forget that it's about building and creating and sustaining high-performing teams. And so there's a dynamic to teams that is we sometimes forget. We sometimes forget about it. So thank you for that. Can you tell us as well you list many examples in the book about many examples of high-performing teams, from the culinary world and chefs to sports to business examples that you have come across and researched yourself. Are there teams that for you stand out when you hear the word high-performance teams? What are the sports or business examples that the one where you say, this is such an inspiring team? I often ask our participants this question, and lots of things come up from the sports world or the music world. And so I'm just curious, what are these for you?
Nigel, I'll let you go on that one first.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, going just a little bit to Mike's point, was that I think everybody's in a team these days. You go in any organizations, everyone's in this team and that team, and there's teams here and teams there. And I was always like, are these really teams? These aren't like the teams I've been working with. These are just people calling themselves teams. And then we got this broader conversation about teams and where we're seeing teams. And everyone talks about business and sport. Well, let's talk about teams. Teams are all over the place in all different ways. And the one thing that I was really interested in was the teams that weren't sports teams. So Tom Kerridge, who's actually a friend of mine, was great interviewing him because celebrity chef, right? So you think about him and you think he's a chef, but behind him is a team in a kitchen. And we've seen all this stuff on TV, but I was fascinated to ask him how it worked, not from how does the soup and the potatoes get onto the plate to go into the restaurant, but more about how does he work with his team? And he saw it very much as developing a high-performance team in a restaurant. That's what a restaurant is behind the scenes. And so I then wanted to know, well, are you doing the same things that we do, in sport? And so I learned lots from Tom about the way he works in a kitchen. And it was very much how a team prepares for a sporting event. And it's no surprise he likes watching sport as well and learns the other way. And so that was really interesting. Then we got into surgeons and pilots and all kinds of things where teams were all over the place, all around us. But the question was, what makes them successful? What were the key parts? And so when you say, which teams do you like? I like to see teams produce some fantastic results. It doesn't matter what they're doing. And so it could be sport, whereas football, I'm quite into football. Rugby, obviously, I follow, watch the All Blacks. I've played against them. They were a great team. And everyone talks about their culture and about everything about them. You see football teams change and ebb and flow and develop, and you apply what you learn to your favorite teams and wonder which stage are they in? Where are they going next? So I think high performance teams are all around us. And when we actually look around, you start to ask questions about what these teams do, how they've been developed, what makes them high performers, what makes some teams better than others. And we did say when we named the book, When Teams Work, we also talked about, but when they don't work, yes, because that often happens too. So I think teams are all around us, and I like identifying teams, not just following teams. So it's not just sport, it's not just business, it's just teams.
Great, Nigel. Nigel's very positive, and you asked me, do I see teams that work? And if I'm really honest, I mostly see teams that don't work. And I guess I'm really fascinated by teams that don't work, because my job is kind of, if all the teams worked optimally, I wouldn't have a job. So, in that case, I'm really happy to see teams that perform suboptimally. And I guess I see that all the time. I mean, there are some that work better than others, some that are more aware than others. But as I said, my job is to go in, and although I like to help them develop what's already working, so I think that's an important point, is to look at what is working and develop that, and at the same time have a fairly critical eye on what could be different, what could be better. So I'm always really happy to see a team that's performing suboptimally, because I think it's a kind of like Freddie Hertzberg's hygiene factors. There are a lot of things that that could be different, that need to be in place, that are actually not in place. And I mean basic things like listening to each other, not judging, looking for what's, is going well. Just some basic things that I think need to be in place for teams to work better.
Thank you so much for this. I think in both of your answers, there's lots of things that resonate with me. Nigel, you mentioned something very important, which is the idea that, of course, teams are all around us, but we somehow overuse the word teams. It's everywhere. We call every collection of individuals teams, when in fact groups are very different from teams. And you make a point of it in the book to say, not every group is a team, nor should it be, right? Nor should it be. But this distinction is a very, very important one. And so I really appreciated seeing this in the book, because with our participants here, we have this discussion very often. It's not the case that everybody should be always a team. Groups are fine too. Just be mindful of it. Just be aware of it. What is it that you were trying to accomplish? And so that idea resonated very strongly with me. And Mike, you mentioned something about when it doesn't work. And my question around this is: do you find the in there probably inherent is the awareness of the fact that it doesn't work, right? One of your chapters is dedicated to self-awareness and individually, but I assume this also translates to the team. Does the team also have an awareness of what isn't working and what is suboptimal? Tell us about the role of awareness in your research.
I'll go on that one first, Nigel, if I may. I think that's a really interesting question, because again, I see two things. One is I see a lot of people who are not aware. So I was working with a group a few months ago, and they were doing an experiential exercise, but they were all very involved. And the person who was leading, de facto leading, said, "Okay, so yeah, we're all in agreement, aren't we?" And moved on. Now, as an observer, I noticed that a couple of the people, especially one young lady who her nonverbals were clearly not in agreement, but the team leader hadn't noticed. I don't know if anybody else had noticed, but if they had, they weren't speaking up because they weren't the leader. And then I did my usual timeout and asked, this young lady specifically if she was in agreement. And of course, she said, no, I don't agree with that. And then the invitation was for the team leader to then actually inquire, expand her thinking, and it was great. And then we put that into the team. But had I not been there, she wasn't speaking up. Nobody else was speaking up, and the team leader hadn't noticed. So I wonder, I think, so many people don't notice because they're not aware, they're not noticing, that's not part of their skill set. And secondly, some people do notice and are aware, but don't speak up because it might not be a career enhancing move to speak up against, as it were, the team leader, unless there is a culture within that team or group of psychological safety, which of course we talk about in the book as well.
It's interesting, isn't it, Mike, on team leadership? These are de facto team leaders, through seniority, sometimes not necessarily because they're the best person to lead the team. So they take it that they're the leader, and there sometimes is a leadership issue where it's telling, not asking, and it certainly isn't listening. Off we go, this is the way. And things have changed over time. People want to contribute, want to be a part of something. and you have to be more collaborative as a leader. So that again is very, very important. How leadership is placed within a team. Is the right person to get the right results, and often not, and often through seniority. But I think listening, to Mike's point, listening is so important these days.
And in this example that you listed, it's also interesting to see the idea of hero leadership versus servant leadership reflected, right? Because this example, it makes me think more of hero leadership, that you step forward and you sometimes forget that you're there also to listen as a leader. And you talk about a continuum, don't you? That it's not that one is perfect, always perfect, or the other, but that somewhere we should find ourselves on this continuum, probably also host better than always being the hero. I love the quote that begins this chapter. Actually, it's a Henry Ford quote, that you don't need a position to lead. And in the example that you just listed, Mike, I guess this female participant, I suppose it's also about, she felt it was not her, she was not in the position to lead, but we all can lead at all times, can't we? And so I think that's a very powerful idea you evoked in the book.
Thank you. We just building on that, the idea I think we talk a lot about is stepping forward and stepping back. So this young lady in question, I would need to help her, or she, if she could develop the confidence to speak up and step forward into, not to be the leader, but to be perhaps a leader or demonstrate leadership within the team or group. And the person who is the, de facto leader, they, can learn to step back and invite others, and which is, something we talk about in the concept of leader as host rather than leader as hero, which I think is, a very interesting way of, different way of looking at leadership. And because I think, as Nigel said, things have evolved even in, rugby teams, which is, can be fairly macho at times. We talk privately about the, changing style of what people need in a team. And Nigel, I mean, you give some really good examples of how you see that even on the field of rugby.
Yeah, it's changed a lot in sport. I know when I was younger, it was very hierarchical in that you would have the older players would be seen as a leadership group. You wouldn't have a younger player in that group, even to the point where some clubs, the older players would sit at the back of the bus, the younger ones would sit at the front of the bus. And as you got more experience, you're allowed to move a bit further back in the bus. And it's a bit strange when you look at it, because if you weren't strong and, mentally robust in those situations as a young player, it could be very off-putting and could actually affect the team's performance and probably drive people away from that environment. So it was very important. Things have changed. It's not like that anymore, thankfully. But, it was keep your head down, not keep your head up. And I think that's important. You want people to be confident, to give their opinion, to participate, to be a part of a team. And being a part of a team is something that a leader can facilitate. But I think sometimes leaders feel a little bit threatened by asking opinions as if it's a weakness, because I think sometimes we feel that a great leader is out there charging, follow me, here we go. Well, it's not always like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring me to the idea of what you've evoked about diversity and young versus older, more experienced players, etc. You bring me to the idea of team composition, and you speak about personality as well in the book. And you also mention several assessments and those that you have found useful over the course of your research. Tell us a little bit about team composition from a personality point of view. Is there such a thing as I get that question a lot. Should it be, should we look at a team for this particular task? Should it be a team of extroverts? Should it be a team of extroverts and introverts? Should it be people who are high on agreeableness or flexible and not high on openness? Tell us a little bit about your point of view on personality mix optimal. Is there such a thing, or is it more in the process of how teams work? What's your
I can kick off, Nigel. I think it's more in the process. I mean, if you look at the research, there are some people in terms of personality, if people are low on agreeableness and low on conscientiousness, etc. That they tend to be, maybe not to fit in to teams. But generally speaking, I think diversity is the best thing for a team. So we're looking for perhaps complementary. So I've been doing the Lumina feedback with a big French international company, and you can see the profile. The profile is down to earth, reliable, outcome focused, which is great. And they're lacking, I think, a little bit of diversity. If you get teams that are not diverse, they may agree with each other. So there's not so much conflict, but they're not going to be as innovative or creative as they could be. But then if you do get a complementary team, you have differences of opinion, different ways of looking at the world. And then how do we resolve, the potential conflict and the idea that, conflict is a bad thing? Well, actually, conflict is necessary. But then how do we deal effectively? How do we listen? How do we encompass both? Was it Emerson? There's an American philosopher, Emerson, who said, I can't remember the exact quote, but he said that, just thinking consistently is the sign of a tiny mind. I can't remember exactly the quote. But, it's okay to be different. It's okay to have disagreements. And out of these disagreements, usually, if it's well managed, can come, the new perspective, the different perspective.
Yeah, I think to that, Mike, a well-managed diversity within a team is a strength in terms of performance. I know back in the day, most of the teams I dealt with were all from that area, from that region, etc. For example, WASP was generally all English players at the time. And then we started opening up to Samoan players and Tongan players and New Zealanders and South Africans and bringing them into the environment. And they all brought something with them. They were very different personalities, different strengths on the field, different weaknesses, but they gel together and they grow and they get strong. And these bonds between the players got very strong. And I think that was always a strength. Diversity was a strength, not something you went out seeking. It just became a very positive thing for a team. And I particularly like as well about the personality piece was working with Spotlight with Sir Andrew Strauss. And what that does is it says, well, this is you as you are now, but this is also you when the pressure comes on. Yes. And we all know that we change when pressure comes on. We behave differently. And I'm always interested that when the pressure comes on, when the games are tight, when, the big cup games, the close games, when you've really got to win a game, personalities change. People start to either shy away or people front up. They tend to change. They become more introvert, more extrovert. And you see these things. Knowing how these people work, understanding what makes them tick really does help you as a leader. But I think the diversity is so important because without that mix, I think it's a weakness.
Yes. What you say resonates with me very strongly because I think the greatest sin a team can commit is really not putting any effort in understanding each other. I love that your chapter was called Understanding Self and Others. It's not just about where you stand on a personality continuum, but it's about understanding where you are and understanding where others are in relation to you and what this means. And so it's the complementarity, it's the differences, it's talking about them, evoking them. What does this mean for the way we collaborate? It's really very often, more often than not, I find it in the dialogue and in the conversation that this diversity gets leveraged the most. And these conversations can only happen when there is when psychological safety is in place. You talk about that in the book. That, of course, diversity and inclusion, very important concepts, both of diversity, inclusion, but diversity can't be leveraged unless you have psychological safety in place. And so I really liked the starting quote of the chapter, which was Amy Edmondson's idea that it's about learning. Psychological safety is about learning. Very often people think psychological safety is about feeling comfortable or being in a cocoon. And it's in fact quite the opposite, isn't it? It's creating that environment of interpersonal risk-taking. Tell us a little bit about your research in that field, psychological safety and its importance.
it's something again that, having read the concept of I think it's been very well researched by Amy Edmondson, and of course she built on research of others, and we include some of the Hull EF research as well. But I think again it's a very practical thing, and it comes back to what Nigel said, that theories, if you can come with a theory that helps you understand something, and I think that psychological safety really brings something that is important, that people speak up. We're talking about complexity. We're talking about so-called wicked problems that we're facing. So problems that have no the answer. And if there is no the answer, then one person cannot, give the answer. So it kind of argues for a different type of leadership. And therefore we need people to speak up and voice opinions. Now, when I talk about this in my work, in my practice, people say, but what happens if their idea is rubbish? and that comes back so many times. And I have to think about it. Well, how do you know it's rubbish unless you explore it, first of all? And then if it tends to be, not practical, that doesn't matter. At least the person then they've listened, they've been a willing participant, they've voiced they've been creative, and usually you can then build on that. So I don't think, and so I talk about something, I don't know actually if we wrote about it in the book, but the idea of looking for something positive in any idea.
Yes.
And looking, even if it's a small nugget of something, and there usually is, and focusing on that and saying, what I like about your idea is then the narrow focus, and then building onto it. And for me, that is the skill set that I think team members, team leaders should have, and which for me at the moment is not yet apparent in most teams.
Yeah, and I agree. I think any idea is a positive, isn't it? You want everybody to feel safe to come forward with an idea, and the more extreme ideas probably take the most courage. So you want the psychological safety to be there. I also think that when you analyze performance of a high performance team, if you haven't got psychological safety, it's a very challenging thing for people to call people out on things that didn't go right, or something that somebody else could have done to help them understand that this could be better. And I think it's that learning environment where everybody feels they're learning and contributing and working together for the common good. And so you have to have psychological safety to make sure that people can come forward. Introverts within the room, you see them when you're in a room and they all sit at a different place. Some sit at the front and some are always answering questions and some don't. You want to encourage everybody to participate and feel comfortable to participate. And one of the ways I used to do this actually was to put them into smaller groups that don't want to put their hand up in a bigger group.
Right.
And then you find that in a smaller group, someone participates more. And so then bring them together so they're confident. And they've suddenly, if they're coming up with ideas and people think they're fantastic ideas, they get confident. And then they contribute to the wider group. Yes. So it's recognizing those that feel less safe, and making it a balance between those that are probably taking too much of the energy out of the room.
Yes. I think that's a very practical, thank you for that. It's a very practical tip for our listeners here on the webinar, which is you need to create the right forum for every person in the room. And for some people, this will be the big room, working the room. For some people, it will be the smaller group. For some people, it will be pair work. And some people might need a little bit more even individual reflection than others. So working with the different forums really for generating ideas and mixing those up, I think is a very valuable idea. And I don't think this happens enough in organizations. People don't, or I see meetings that are either too big. We don't see enough of the ideas bouncing around. People don't build on them. It's usually monopolized. The airtime is monopolized by the leader or someone else who's the most vocal. So that idea, that's a very practical tip to address and increase actually psychological safety. Would you say to senior leaders, CEOs who say, hang on a second, I'm producing results without much investment in psychological safety, who are a bit cynical about investing on the soft side and who see this as a bit of fluff, and, tree huggers do that, like how, what do you say to CEOs who are just skeptical to that idea and would say, I'm still getting good results?
Well, I would say, how do you know that it wouldn't work for you? You're probably just going into what's right, what you feel is right for you, and has got your results over time. Mm-hmm. But how about this could be even better, and your results could be even better if you had more psychological safety, if you had more buy-in from your team, if you had more people, wanting to come to work every day and want to be in this team and want to drive things forward. I would say, why wouldn't you take a look at that, not dismiss it?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I think, you get results, but you could get even better results. And we know, there's a huge amount of research out there in terms of, more effective, better performance from people who are engaged with, psychological safety, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I come back to complexity and wicked problems. If that's the environment we are in, which we are, then we need different ideas, and we need people to contribute fully. We can't have people coming along to work and, switching off, the outside of work, their parents, their fathers, mothers, uncles, presidents of voluntary associations, part-time firefighters. So we definitely need to bring the whole self to our organizations. And I think that can only be done if we are free to be our true selves.
Yes. I really appreciate this point of view that you're both evoking, which is, how do these CEOs know that performance couldn't be even better, for example? I think this is a very powerful point. And what you're evoking, Mike, as well, which is a bit of a blending between work and life these days. And so that poses a whole nother challenge. So we have to be our authentic selves. On this, I want to, on the psychological safety topic, I just want to highlight to our readers one thing that I found very useful in your chapter, which was the idea that we're combining psychological safety with individual accountability. I thought this was quite insightful, actually, because you were looking at 4 combinations, right? High psychological safety, but low individual accountability. High psychological safety, high individual accountability, and the reverse. Tell us just a little bit about the role of this individual accountability in the whole piece.
Well, Nigel, I think I'll let you go on that in terms of, because you illustrated that very often in terms of, talking about teams and people having accountability in the team.
Yeah, I think it's about roles and responsibilities within teams, isn't it? Where I admire what people can do. People are fantastic at what they do within teams. It's bringing the best out of people, and also people recognizing that they're not great at this, and this guy's better than I am, And as a leader, I used to enjoy that. That's one of the things I enjoyed the most, is finding out what people can do and how they can add, more to the team. So for me, it's all about that. People wanting to be accountable for what they're good at doing, and they want to master their area. And you've got to let them master their area and let them take control and let them show what they can do, and give them an environment where they can want to come into that environment and want to be the best they can possibly be for the good of the team. And in return, they get respect and confidence, and they add tremendous value to the team.
Yes, absolutely. This is a really interesting, and I think it's quite helpful for any leader to really think about these two in combination, individual accountability and psychological safety. I think that's quite insightful. And just for our listeners on this webinar, just to mention, one of the great strengths of this book is that, in fact, every chapter and every topic that is explored pretty much ends with a set of very powerful reflection questions around where do you stand on a certain continuum, or how are you doing as a leader in terms of certain behaviors, and also quite practical tips about what each of us can do in particular situations. Just as an example, on psychological safety, you end on how to actually build this safety in the team. You talk about framing, you talk about acknowledging one's own fallibilities, about being curious and asking questions. You mentioned the idea of self-awareness as well, speaking less, listening more, modeling by your own behavior. So you're focusing on these 6 areas and talk extensively about the how, which I think is a very, very practical way of engaging the readers. Let me quickly ask you about virtual teams. We've spoken about psychological safety, self-awareness, etc. But all of this gets a lot more challenging in virtual teams, doesn't it?
I think the last 2 years,
Nigel,
we were talking about this morning, Mike, and your challenges with technology, and me having a background and you not today, and these kinds of things. It's technology is all around us now, and we are running teams. And the last 2 years, I think 2 years ago, would we've done many things online? Would we be using Zoom and Teams in the way that we do today? We definitely wouldn't. But I always challenge this. I find Zoom and Teams and online meetings very transactional. It's sort of, I say it's sort of one-dimensional, transactional. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. You miss out on so many things that we used to have. So I think it's caution really for me is to get a balance between, yes, transactional things online, but also having time to get a more 3D version of things, get together more often if you can, but not just do everything online. But online, there are different ways you can make these things work. I think just being transactional, be very wary about just being transactional. You do need some interaction. So provide time for that interaction, because, we put our diaries now, don't we? Our diaries go, it's at 10:30 to 11 o'clock, and we're on our 11 o'clock till 11:30, and we work like that. It doesn't always give time to have that chat, that extra little bit of talk to somebody, or that follow-up that we probably would do when we're face-to-face and in an office. So I think things have changed, not saying for the worse, but I think we have to be just wary about the things that we lose by being online.
And Nigel, may I just, it's a follow-up question on the transactional element. What is the cause of that? What does technology do precisely that makes us more transactional? I've always been curious about that. What is it? What is different? I mean, obviously, we're not face-to-face, but why? Why more transactional?
I think it's how we use it. And it's not that it can't be more social. I mean, I do this with my board. So I have a board of investors, and 13 of them, they all own rugby clubs. So they are pretty diverse around the country. They live in different places. We meet at good times. It's very convenient. And we have board meetings, which are very transactional. We have an agenda and we go through the agenda. We don't leave time for any sort of chat. And I was feeling they were getting a little bit depressed at times during this period. So I started what I called owners meetings, where we just came online with no agenda. And when we came online with no agenda, it was a completely different feeling. People interacted, talked to each other, and it was a much more positive meeting. So now we've got a balance between the two, because I think it helps. So that's the sort of thing that transactional is driven by us. We make it transactional.
Yes.
To get a function, we want an outcome, and we think that it's online, so it's transaction. It doesn't have to be.
I noticed in the chat, I think Bogdan asked what is transactional in this context, and this is, the transaction, the deal, as it were. I give you this, you give me that. So it's limited, if you like. It's not taking account of the humanity, of the emotion, of the social need. I mean, I always like to repeat that humans, we are social creatures, and that we're actually the third most social species on the planet, behind ants and bees. And we forget that we have this need. I have a friend who worked for a major international consulting company, no names, and they would start their Monday morning meeting. And the Monday morning meeting would be, okay, so what the objectives for this week are, and this was during COVID. And my friend talked to me, but she used to work for another company, a smaller organization, where they would start on the Monday morning with, how are you? How are your family? How are you coping? What's on your mind? What have you been up to? What interesting thing, so it seems to be kind of a couple of extremes here. And I think, as Nigel said, we have to make time for the social interaction, the building of the community, the building of the relationship. The relationship is critical. So, we need to do it. So, I will advise people now to their hour to have the psychologist hour, which is 50 minutes. So we have our 50-minute session, and then you have 10 minutes, which you can either use to go and get a coffee, reflect on what you've just done, or take 10 minutes to, how are you? Or finish off with that. Doesn't matter where you start or finish, but I think it's absolutely critical. And some other things about virtual. I always ask people if we're doing a Zoom with a smaller, even up to 20, 25 people, to at least introduce themselves, to get their voice in the room. Because if somebody doesn't speak up immediately, then they can be ignored. And if they don't have their camera on and we don't specifically address them, it can be very difficult. So I like very much to ask people to have their voice in the room, and also just to speak up whenever they like. They don't have to put their hand up. They just speak up. You don't put your hand up in class, in a session or in a meeting. So why put it up? Just speak up, I think. And if somebody speaks up too much, I'll then ask them, to invite other people to speak up.
Yes.
I think there's also just a piece there about global teams now. The opportunity is also huge, isn't it? Because we're all more comfortable about using this technology. We can understand time zones. It means you can build great teams virtually, but you have to also make sure that you, between meetings, for example, that may be quite transactional, catch up with people, speak to people, get to know people in the way that you can't because you're not together. So I think that's another benefit to this, is you can build strong teams, really strong, high-performance teams. You're not married to just having to use what you've got, your resources locally or in England or wherever. You can do it globally. The talent is out there.
Can I just pick up on that quickly? Sorry, that there are opportunities as well, as Nigel said. So, with in Hull at the beginning of the COVID, one of our colleagues, Michael Shaskalson, offered us a mindfulness session, and so an 8-week program, which was fantastic. And some of us kept on. We enjoyed that, and we kept on doing our mindfulness every week. So there are people in that group that I now count as friends that I have not yet met. And that's 2 years. And some of them, I've gone to meet them, but we became friends on Zoom. So I think there are opportunities if you use the technology well.
That's a great point that you're both making, which is at the and it really that's been my point of view as well, which is at the end of the day, you're dealing with people, and people are people. And whether you meet them face to face or virtually, they're still going to be the same people. They're going to have the same needs. They're going to have the same need for bonding, as you mentioned before, Nigel. And so in many ways, it's a little bit more difficult, and you have to make a slightly bigger investment in the relationship. But it really, if they are transactional, it's because we make them transactional. And you evoked before, Mike, that was, and it's in the book, in quite a few chapters, you mentioned the importance, you all mentioned the importance of contracting, kind of setting the agreement about how we're going to work together. And then the importance of check-ins as well. You just mentioned that as well. Can you tell us a little bit about when teams work, what do they get right about contracting? I work with a lot of top teams and senior executive teams that frankly skip this stage entirely and then wonder why it's dysfunctional. So tell us a little bit about the importance of the collective agreement.
Well, Nigel, I'll jump off if you don't mind, and then you can jump in. I think it's essential, and I'm always amazed, as you said, how teams don't do this. I mean, one example was I was running an experiential exercise, and I set people off in small groups to reflect how they wanted to work together. And one group, I won't say what profession, I won't say what nationality, because it's a little
maybe it will be obvious.
It's pretty obvious in a way, but they refused. And they said, why should we waste time thinking about this? We will just work together. And I tried to, convince them about, how do they want to work together, the different personalities, what different outcomes they wanted, what they liked, how they would deal with whatever. And I still couldn't convince them. So, okay, that's fine. But I think I'm amazed. I'm just amazed at how can you work together if you haven't set out at least the expectations, the purpose, how to resolve issues, etc., etc. I'm just flabbergasted at the lack of contracting.
Yes.
Yeah, I worked with a professional football team at one point that got promoted from the Championship to the Premiership. And it was a fantastic year for that particular team. And it was at Christmas where I think we made a massive breakthrough with the team, because they were going to, the boss said, we'll train on Christmas Day. And then we'll come back in the afternoon and get the bus and go to, I think they're going to Wolves or somewhere like that. And one of the players said, well, why do we have to come in the morning and then have to go back in the afternoon to catch a bus? Why don't we just come later and catch the bus? Which sound like a lot of sense. And I said, well, why doesn't that happen? And they said, well, go and ask the boss. So I went to see the boss, the manager, and I said, why are you training on Christmas Day morning? He said, because we always train on Christmas Day morning. And I said, well, the players don't want to do that. I said, well, if the players want to do something else, we'll do that. So They changed their mind and said, we'll catch the bus in the afternoon. We'll train first, catch the bus. It's just one trip there, etc. And one of the players said, you do realize now, if we lose, it'll be all our fault. And I said, isn't it usually your fault if you lose? Isn't it?
Yeah.
So is this, how are we going to work? And after that, they started to work together to think of things that would make things better. And they created lots of things. And the boss was open to this. And by being open to it, he got more suggestions, more thoughts, more better ways of doing things. And they enjoyed creating a better environment just by being given the opportunity.
Yes, and I love what you talk about there, which is, yes, it's also creating a sense of accountability that high performance teams, in the end, it's because the team performs better. It's not because the leader performs better or an individual. So the collective responsibility in terms of contracting and how we agree together, all of us, is of course becomes even more important. On virtual work, you mentioned, you have the good practices. You also have the 10 top tips about virtual collaboration. You mentioned, reducing PowerPoint as much as possible, never speaking more than 4 minutes without asking a question. That's, I think, a very insightful point for many of our executives. Hygiene factors, making sure you're in a quiet space, not doing back-to-backs. But one of these I found especially striking, and it will be non-obvious to our listeners, which is, don't be afraid of silence. You have a wonderful quote in here: feel it, don't fill it. Feel it, don't fill it. And we're, especially in virtual, we're often afraid of silences, aren't we?
Isn't that a lot to do with individual coaching as well? I coach individuals quite a lot and team leaders and things, and it is very uncomfortable when you leave a silence. But by leaving a silence, the person you're talking to may just fill that silence. It's not table tennis, this. You don't, I'll ask a question, you give me an answer. I'll ask you a question, you give me an answer. If you suddenly don't say anything, it's interesting to see what happens. Somebody will fill that vacuum with something, and it might be really important. Yeah,
it's interesting. We're very, want to acknowledge Ghislaine Collat, Dr. Ghislaine Collat here, who has been researching virtual teams like about 15, 20 years ago. And when everybody's going, no, why are you doing this? And that's just her quote, this idea of allowing the silence and see what emerges from that silence. And as Nigel said, there's too many of the team leaders that jump in to fill the silence. And especially if we have people who are less confident, especially if we're talking about people from different nationalities, and of course, introverted people who need to perhaps have a little bit more time. So, I think it's one of the absolute key lessons, not just in the virtual meeting, actually, but in the face-to-face meeting as well.
Absolutely. In any meeting, I think there's lots of insight. There can be so much insight in a silence. There's been an interesting question in the chat, and it's I certainly have a point of view on that. but would like you to go. How to deal with people who want to sell and promote themselves during meetings while at the same time they do not have the competence? How do you balance competence with inclusivity? Some people just refuse to learn new things. And at the same time, they're the loudest voice in the room. How do you deal with that type?
Well, we wrote the chapter on facilitation skills just for that particular thing. And you're right. There are people who will take up lots of airtime in I. And in that case, as a team leader, then you need to have the skill to facilitate that and thank them for their contribution. And, thank you. And let's move on. Or invite others in, or if necessary, say that is not what we're talking about today, or let's keep the time. We asked for everybody to contribute. So, we said a minute or 2 minutes. So I think it's really important, again, this coming back to this notion of stepping forward and stepping back. So we have to step back and allow silence. We have to step back and allow contributions. And at the same time, we need to step forward, move things along, close people down if necessary, if what they're talking about is not contributing to, what we're trying to achieve. So I think that's a really important skill to have, actually. So I recognize that is an issue. And we do need to, and as you know, when you are the team leader or you're facilitating or doing something like that, you need to close people down and you need to have some courage and some skill to be able to do that, for sure.
Yes.
I think also not wanting to learn different skills or new skills was one of the questions. And I think that is challenging. I think I would be curious. Curious is a good thing to be as a leader. It allows you to ask questions from a different way. And I would probably be asking the question why you wouldn't want to learn something new. And they would probably give you some explanation why they wouldn't want to do it. But I think it's your job also to say, what are the benefits of this new skill that you want them to learn and the reasons for that? There must be a reason. So I think it is to explore it a little bit deeper with the individual, not in front of everybody else, but a separate session to understand why they wouldn't try something new. Because we think at the end of the day, it's for the benefit of the team, it's for the benefit of them individually.
Yes.
Yeah, and sorry, I like the point Nigel makes there about, dealing with that, being curious, but taking that offline, because as a team leader, your responsibility encompasses the whole process, not just the meetings. So, there's something going on there. Have you not had the courage to address that offline, to ask, to be curious, but also to show the benefits? So, we write about influencing as well, because as a leader and in a team, you influence each other, and you have to be skilled at influencing what's in it for them or why it's important, what the purpose is. But they're always difficult characters. But, the more difficult the character, the more skilled you have to be as a leader.
And I'm also seeing a few other comments that relate to this question in the chat as well. And so just for me to add as well on this one, I think you're making powerful points around challenging that person and asking the right questions. I also think there's something to be said about organizations. If this is a pervasive problem, then it seems like the organization is also tolerating underperformance and lack of competence, which is a whole separate issue. And many organizations do that, right? And then it can fall on the individual to challenge, but it might also be a collective problem as well, in which case, and we do see organizations like that, don't we, where underperformance is not addressed. People find it difficult to make the tough calls, especially when the competence is not there, or they find it difficult to make the tough call, or they find it difficult to coach for better competence and to improve the capabilities. Those are very different, very difficult skills to build organizationally. So thank you for these questions. I just want to press on because we sadly have only 6 minutes left. And I could talk about this for days with both you, Mike and Nigel. But I do want to ask you something about trust as well, because very often I hear executives talk about, yes, trust is important, but somehow don't find the mechanisms to build it. And you make a very important distinction in the different types of trust, right? The capability side of trust, the relational, the contractual. Am I going to deliver on the promise that I made? Tell us a little bit about what you've seen in your research and your careers around good ways of building trust.
I think my main point is consistency, and doing what you say you're going to do, and being open with people. I find that you build trust. You have to build it over time, and I know it is true. It is easily lost, but it takes time to build, and you do that through being consistent. In my view, and being consistent could mean, for a selection of teams, for example, as a team coach, that you don't have favorites, that you base it on performance, that you are consistent in that selection, that you do it on the basis of performance, for example, and people trust that you will make those right decisions. And I think that builds over time. And for me, it's about building it over time and being consistent.
For me, I think the most important thing is to just have the conversation. I have a friend who's a psychologist in Sweden, and he says, when people say, I trust you, he gets really angry because it's meaningless to say, I trust you. The question should be, I trust you to do X, Y, or Z. And so I think the conversation, the clarity about what are we talking about, let's name this, I trust you to do. And that's why I very much like, Dennis and Michel Reiner's concept of contractual capability and relational trust. And I agree with Nigel. I think that trust has to be built by trusting people and in small steps. You don't trust somebody. And I think Tom Kerridge, our chef, he talked about that. He starts off, the chefs, the sous chefs, they don't start off with the expensive steak or cuts of meat. They start off with the potatoes, the cabbage, the turnips, and when they've mastered that, they go to the next level. So I think that's a really important part of the process, is to build trust in small steps.
Yes.
I think also, Mike, trust goes two ways. It's not just the team trusting the leader, it's the leader trusting the team. And that has to build both sides.
Yeah, it has to be reciprocal, yeah.
Yes. It is reciprocal, and what I'm hearing from you is it's built in iterative ways, and you take the small steps and you do it experientially in a way, right? You experience the trust given and the trust received, which is very powerful. You also have really interesting chapters in the book about the role of the leader as a coach and as a facilitator. And I just want to highlight for our listeners today that those chapters are really worth reading. There's some really interesting models, frameworks suggested, from the GROW model to appreciative inquiry, etc. Really good, useful frameworks to use as a leader if you want to apply the coaching style more, and if you want to become a better and more skilled facilitator of your team, which is a under-practiced skill. I think very often leaders are leaders leading from the front, and very rarely do I see leaders who are effective facilitators and coaches. I want to leave all of our listeners today with maybe a question that both of you want to ask them, the question that you have found kind of foundational. If there's one thing they should all think about and pay attention to, what would that be? And before I hand over to you, I just want to highlight that the book also ends with a very useful chapter around the future of teams. And what are some trends that we might be looking at? And you'll see many, from hybrid to diversity and inclusion, health and well-being. One of them also will be very relevant to all of you listening today, which is kind of the life cycle of a team, right? That it becomes a little bit shorter and shorter, that very often we're in projects, in temporary teams that don't last forever or years, maybe it's weeks. And a question from my side is, when are you making the choices to invest? Even if it's a short life cycle, it's still important to invest in some of these if you need creativity, if you're looking at improved performance and so on. So the life cycle, if it becomes shorter, you might feel discouraged to invest, but actually doesn't matter if you're looking at interaction and interdependence you might still want to invest because you're aiming at higher performance. Nigel, Mike, one question to our listeners today. What should, if there's one thing they should be thinking about, what would that be?
I can jump off because I have a question that no matter how long or short the life cycle is, whether it's a team or a group or whoever, is, how will we work together? What is the optimal way of working together? And again, that's a question that can be asked to the group or to the team and then have the conversation.
For me, I think it's a Steve DeShassa quote, which I remember for being a team leader, which is basically it's something about where you stand is what you see and what you don't see. And if you move your position, you'll see something different. And so for me, it's looking at things from everybody's perspective, not just your own. And so try, and it's quite an interesting exercise, putting yourself in a different position, seeing things differently and being curious.
Yeah, great.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So it's about the togetherness, but also about the perspective taking, which is lovely takeaways. Thank you all for being with us today. I'm seeing some very nice feedback in the chat. Thank you for that. And Nigel, Mike, it's been a privilege to have this 1 hour webinar with you, and I look forward to more. Thank you, everybody, and have a lovely holiday season. Hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.